These are Nebraska corn farmers. They work in acres, not hours, harvesting the energy and climate solutions the world needs. We are proud to stand with you.
The success of tomorrow's soy industry depends on the actions we take today. The future is here, and the time to move is now.
Market Journal Television for Agricultural Business Decisions is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources in partnership with the Nebraska Rural Radio Association. Promotional support provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine and partial funding provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board and the Nebraska Corn Board.
Hi everyone, I'm Bryce Duskett, and thank you very much for joining us on Market Journal. We are broadcasting today from a county here in Nebraska that was named after a general who died in the Battle of Little Bighorn. The county at one point was nicknamed the sod capital of the world, like that sod house just behind me. Any guesses where we're at? I'll reveal it coming up here in a few moments. Let's preview what's coming ahead here on Market Journal. Do you want to fly a drone on your farm or ranch? If so, you might need a license, and we'll give you some thoughts on how you can do so with Nebraska Extension. Barchart Senior Analyst Darin Newsom is standing by to give us his thoughts on the grain markets. And this week was the World Pork Expo. Chad Moyer is going to file a report here coming up in a few minutes. We'll get to those stories coming up, but first we begin by an update out in the field here as we are in Custer County today. Here's our In the Field update. Our In the Field update looks a bit different today as we've got cattle behind us and we're out at a pasture checking on pasture conditions with Jordan Popp just south of Broken Bow, Nebraska. Jordan, tell me a bit about the operation.
Yeah, so we're mainly a cow-calf operation. We do raise some corn and soybeans, hay some alfalfa, sorghum sudan grass, and we do have some cover crops that we've used the last couple of years. So what we do is, like with a rye, we do that after chopping silage, and I did some on after soybean ground this past year. For triticale, I've kind of used it in a two crop system with haying sorghum sudan grass right after we cut down the triticale, and so that's kind of worked for us really well.
It's probably been a while since you've seen pastures looking this green as they do today.
Yeah, it's been a couple of years. That's something I was talking about with you earlier, is that night and day difference between especially 2 years ago and last year to this year. I mean, we went from everything out here was brown and just had a hard time going. This year, I mean, the cool season grasses really took off once we started to get some more sunlight, but with as much rain as we've gotten this past year, or especially in May, I think we were like 8 inches or so of moisture. And last year, people were kind of wondering, like, do we need to turn the pivots on before we get in the field, or are we going to really cut down on our cow herd? And we got 2 inches of rain in the beginning of May, and that kind of, we got lucky with a lot of moisture throughout the summer, and we made it. Our grass looked pretty good at the end of the year, but people were still really hurting, to just a lot of pasture health concerning. And so this year has been a really good rebuilding year for pasture. And I know that's kind of been also a hard time getting in the field. I felt like when I was planting this year, I did it all in the dark because, you find a planting window and you just take it, and it was a little wet, and we took what we got. And there's still some people that we're mainly done with everything as far as row crops go. I've heard of some soybeans in around Sargent that still have yet to go, and maybe a shorter season corn variety for silage for people to plant. But yeah, it's a completely different year for moisture goes, and it's really nice and to be able to look back and actually see some green grass in the pastures, and it's a lot more reassuring in that way, I guess, for a rancher.
Yeah, I'm sure that rain is welcome, but we're approaching a challenging time because I'm sure you're wanting to get in the field and get some hay cut.
Yeah, and I think we probably would have cut our alfalfa probably a good week ago. It's been ready, and just I know some around Ansley have cut their hay down, and unfortunately have got it rained on, and I don't know, it's one issue versus the next, and depends on, you know, what your attitude is. And I think we're a lot better off, but we still also have to have a lot of rain throughout the summer. And
kind of describe your soil type, where you're at here. I guess you're not technically yet in the sand hills, but have to imagine you've got some sandy soils, at least in places.
Yeah, and you know, we live in a pretty unique ecological range in Nebraska, and so we're only about an hour north of the Platte Valley and an hour south of the sandhills where we sit. And so our pasture is hardland pasture, really good grasses that are able to grow. You know, a typical stocking ratio is about 8 acres to 10 acres per pair, which is a really good number. And you know, like I said, the last couple of years, people kind of had to really push their pasture probably a little too much, and this year you kind of have a little bit more breathing room. But cool season grasses are really taking off, and the biggest thing is that we have a lot more soil moisture for this year. Over the winter, we did get some adequate snowfall, and I felt a lot more comfortable going into like planting and going in or taking cows into pasture. But then, yeah, as soon as those April and May, we kind of recovered our subsurface moisture levels, and we're a lot better off.
Thanks to Jordan for sharing that update with us. As we take a look at the projections from the U.S. Department of Agriculture when it comes to pasture and range condition in Nebraska, they're estimating that 25% of pasture and range is in fair condition and 70% is actually in the good to excellent condition. Well, the World Pork Expo has earned its title. It has become the world's largest pork industry trade show, which brings together pork professionals and industry leaders from all around the world. That expo took place this week at the Iowa State Fairgrounds in Des Moines, Iowa. And my Rural Radio Network colleague, Chad Moyer, is standing by with this update. Chad?
Thank you very much there, Bryce. At this week's World Pork Expo, which took place at the Iowa State Fairgrounds in Des Moines, producers from all over the region, all across the country, and from around the world for that matter, took in the latest in agriculture, in pork production, techniques, and various different things, and also heard kind of a situation and outlook. And providing that here at World Pork Expo was Steve Meyer with EverAg. Steve, thanks for joining us here today. First of all, it's been a tough couple of years in pork production. I guess as we come into 2024, what is the situation? Are things getting a little better?
It is better, but not good. I would characterize as that. Last year was clearly a terrible year for pork producers. In fact, our model, which really represents the low-cost 25% of producers, would say that losses were in excess of $27 a head last year. Now, that is strict cash purchase of corn, soybean meal, strict cash marketing of hogs, no risk management involved in that. And we think there was a substantial amount of risk management done that probably mitigated some of that $27, but it was a terrible year, just no matter how you cut it. This year is better. It's not going to be a year for much healing, it doesn't look like. Back in March, that same model had us with $10 profits for the year. Now that model has with $2 losses for the year. And so things have gotten a little softer as we've gone through the year. So I guess it's one of those bide your time type of things. You need to take advantage of profits when you can do them. But it's certainly not as bad a year as we had last year.
That's on domestic demand. What about internationally and the significance of imports?
That's been a good story. We exported about 26% of our production last year. We're going to be in excess of 27 this year. That should be a record. We grew about 8% on exports last year. Our colleague Brett Stewart at Global Agri-Trends has us up about 9% for this year. And so that's been good. Mexico's leading the way, of course. Korea has been a very nice surprise this year that has grown dramatically, largely because of problems that the EU has had in supplying the export market. And we don't think those problems are going away. So we think we're going to be in pretty good shape going forward here on the export side. So that's been the real positive on demand, where we're shipping about 2% more of our product overseas now than we were a year ago.
All right. What about on the input side for pork producers? I mean, obviously we've got a lot of growing season to go yet, but What are we looking at for, corn, soybean meal, and on the input side?
Well, that's improved, but again, improving from last year isn't saying much. That same cost model that represents the low-cost 25% of producers had a $97 break-even on it for the average of 2023. That would put average producers well over $100 on break-evens. This year, that same model is telling us $87, which would put average producers somewhere in the low 90s, low to mid 90s. And so an improvement there, but lower is not low. And I don't think we're going much lower than where we are now, somewhere probably in the mid to low 80s on break-evens if we have a really good crop. And we've got a real potential for that. But as you know, we're setting in early June, so it all depends on what happens in July and August on that. So we're in better shape on costs now than we were a year ago. But still, I don't think you should be penciling in any big breaks on costs as we go through 2024 and into 25.
Okay. I guess just as we wrap up, Steve, take me through the rest of the year and into 2025. What are some things that you'll be watching, and what are some things that could maybe influence the market one way or the other?
Well, we're sure going to watch the status of domestic demand. I mean, I watch that all the time anyway, and we're kind of locked in that we have to wait for the export numbers to come out for a given month before we can figure out how much consumption was in the United States to do those calculations. So we'll be looking at the actual April numbers come Friday when the export data comes out. So we'll watch that very close, and that's a real factor. We're going to be watching exports to see if they stay as strong as they have been. We think they will. That's going to be mainly determined by Mexico, and there's no reason for them not to be buying, especially with a very strong currency that's going to stay current. And then obviously we'll be watching the weather to see what happens on the cost side. I don't think we're going to see any significant drop in hog numbers.
Thanks to Chad for that story. We sure appreciate it. Always something interesting to learn at those expos. Up next, we turn our attention over to the grain markets, and joining the broadcast is Barchart Senior Analyst Darin Newsom to share his 2 cents on where these markets might be heading. Here's our conversation from Thursday morning. Joining us today to discuss the latest activity in the grain complex is Darin Newsom. He is the Senior Barchart Analyst. Darin, good to see you. Thank you for the time.
Thanks for having me on again, Bryce.
Well, you and I are visiting on Thursday morning, which follows 7 kind of consecutive days of seeing things finishing lower, but the story's a bit different today. It kind of plays into one of our viewer questions, so I'll just jump right into that. Jeff wrote in asking if we were near our bottom, and I guess we're kind of turning around here on Thursday. What are you seeing?
Yeah, I think we could see a short-term rally in these markets. We've, as you said, we've been under a great deal of pressure. These markets have been under a great deal of pressure, and we're just coming up on an interesting time here in June. It's called the Goldman Roll. Starts on Friday. It's when a large fund rolls its commodity positions from the nearby contract out to the next, and so this can skew activity, particularly if we take into account the fact that not the non-commercial side in general, the investment side in general, has been selling these markets. We saw July corn down 20 cents from Tuesday to Tuesday, which is when the next CFTC numbers for the commitments to traders were pulled. July soybeans were down 40 some cents. So we know the funds were putting pressure on the corn markets, and now there could be some front running ahead of the Goldman activity, and that could certainly have been lending some of the support to both corn and soybeans. We haven't seen a great deal of fundamental change. A national average basis has been holding steady for soybeans during this time that the futures market's been going down. We have seen some strength in the corn basis. Do I think the low is in? No. In fact, I would argue that the seasonal high is in. So what I'm thinking is going to happen here, if we get this short-term uptrend like what I'm expecting, I think it's going to be a selling opportunity. If we've got some old crop to sell, we do that. If we want to price some new crop 2024 production, I think it's going to give us the opportunity to do that as well.
I hate to make you try to pinpoint things too exact, but when you say short-term rally, you meaning a day or two at most at that point?
I would expect, I think it could possibly be nothing more than a day or two. I think it's going to last a little longer, maybe a week, a couple weeks, get us into mid-June, maybe later June, and then that'll probably top out the markets, I would expect, particularly as more attention, again, with the funds rolling positions, they're going to be paying more attention to new crop, and new crop means weather. And right now, I think the weather is relatively benign. It's a relatively benign factor, though. If we look at the 6 to 10 day, it is for below normal precipitation. So again, I think that's going to give us some excitement here over the next couple of weeks. But in the long term, I think it's just going to be a selling opportunity as we get in deeper into June.
I enjoy reading your commentary from time to time, Darin. You've got a nice way of sizing things up, and you described king crude oil and the king of the ag commodities, that being corn, soybeans, and wheat, being on a similar trajectory since about May 29th. What kind of correlation is there?
Yeah, at times we do see a correlation. Three kings of commodities being gold, crude oil, and corn. And here, recently they all three have been under pressure. But then early this week we started to see some buying coming into gold. It's been a little slower coming into crude oil and corn. We saw crude oil actually finally close higher on Wednesday, and then as you said on Thursday, we've got all three markets rallying. So, the interesting one's been crude oil, with all of the news out there, presumably bullish, with OPEC plus production cuts, with U.S. Department of Energy starting to buy back barrels to fill strategic petroleum reserve. But yet the market has been very slow to move. And this is a seasonal time of year when crude oil, gasoline, and the energy complex as a whole, energy sector as a whole, moves higher. We just haven't seen it. So we haven't seen that big push from a supply and demand side, from the fundamental side, to really get things excited. And get that being the case, market's just been grinding lower.
How about a word on wheat? I'll throw another viewer question your way. Mike wrote in from the Panhandle of Nebraska, says, hey, I seem to miss the best time to sell my wheat each year. Are there particular seasonal trends that he should be watching?
Yeah, the seasonal trend in hard red winter wheat, will start there. We tend to see an early high. Let's say we see the initial seasonal high, say in early June. So this time around, I think it actually occurred in later May. And then the market tends to fall as harvest progresses. The market tends to fall through mid to late August and then start to gain some steam again. So it looks like we're in that time of year where cash hard red winter moves lower. We'll have to see how much pressure wants to come into the market. But again, it would not be surprising this time of year to see both cash and basis weaken. And then we'll see what happens after that. If everyone does start to get excited about global supply and demand, right now we're simply not seeing it. But if it actually starts to become a reality, then there is an opportunity for both for the winter wheat, for the U.S. markets to move higher over the fall and winter.
Wheat harvest underway in Texas and Oklahoma. I don't think any combines rolling just yet in Kansas, but are you hearing any yields come in from those two states in particular?
Yeah, I'm hearing it's scattered. Some of it's better than expected, but I mean that's always an interesting way for producers to report their yield is better than expected. Because a lot of times in the Southern Plains, given the way the weather is and the drought that we still see on the drought monitor, they might not have been expecting much. So we'll have to see how it plays out. Early reports, usually the best wheat is cut or harvested initially as well. So, at least early reports are a little bit better than expected. Now we'll see, once the harvest continues to move north.
What else is Darin Newsom watching? What's important to know here in the early part of June?
The biggest thing right now is the weather. Obviously, we're going to have to keep a close eye on the weather. Again, if we go back to the corn market, we were talking about earlier, I've been tracking the 2020 to 24 timeframe for both cash and new crop December compared to a decade ago. I don't believe in analogous years because of chaos theory, but there's a similarity in these patterns. And what we saw then was both the cash and new crop futures did not bottom out until September, October, and they had a pretty hard fall over the course of the spring and summer. So certainly something that we have to keep an eye on here. If the market does fall apart because of better production expectations, we're going to have to use these opportunities, these short-term opportunities, to get some sales on the books.
Thanks to Darin for joining us on the program this week. You heard me ask a few viewer questions to Darin. If you'd like to ask one of those for next week's Analyst, go ahead and email us. Do so by about Wednesday of next week, and you can use the link here on your screen to get your questions in. Well, it's an all-hands-on-deck effort at Holsteins Unlimited near Lee, Nebraska. The family dairy operation is now expanded to more than 1,600 cows that they milk 3 times a day. June is Dairy Month, and you can read about the Nebraska dairy operation in the latest edition of the Nebraska Farmer. It is that time of the program where we get our weekly update on all things weather with Nebraska Extension's Eric Hunt. Eric, a bit windy where we're at here in Custer County midweek. Are things shaping up for the growing season as we turn to the week ahead?
Thanks, Bryce. I see some heat in the crystal ball for us. For anybody that wants a little bit more information on the extended outlook, I will be doing a more in-depth webinar on Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock Central, 8 o'clock Mountain Time. Visit cropwatch.unl.edu for more details. First portion of the week, we'll see ridging and some heat in the western United States and troughing into the eastern United States. That will keep the central U.S. in the cooler than normal region. So expect highs mostly in the upper 70s to start the work week. There will be chances of precipitation across the areas along and south of Platte on Saturday afternoon, and there will be some chances of precipitation across western Nebraska on Sunday afternoon as well. Eastern half of the state should start off the work week relatively dry. There will be another chance of precipitation across the entire state on Tuesday with some possibly heavier amounts of rain across portions of west central Nebraska on Tuesday afternoon. I think this might be a little bit underdone across eastern Nebraska. So again, this is through next Thursday. Friday night into Saturday morning, we could actually see some relatively strong storms across eastern Nebraska. So these totals might be a little bit underinflated in some places. As we head to the later portion next week, though, we will be back in ridging, and that will bring some heat. So I would expect temperatures to be at least in the upper 80s everywhere by the end of the next week. Matter of fact, I'm going to probably bet that most everybody in the state will be in the low 90s at some point, probably 4 consecutive days in a lot of places by the end of this next week. And in southeastern Nebraska, I'd expect heat index values to probably get close to 100 degrees as dew points push up around 70. The CPC is showing, though, a good chance of above average precipitation for the state as we head to the middle of the month. And I think we'll have to keep an eye on this storm system as we move in the week after next. So this will be a little bit after Father's Day. Now, again, this is quite a ways out, and this is in the artificial intelligence system of the European model. But if this verifies, with this deep trough in the west and the ridging in the east, that would help bring up some Gulf moisture, so bringing plentiful shear. That would mean a really good chance of severe weather for a lot of the central plains and western Corn Belt as we move into the week after next, with potential for some heavier precipitation, but that's still a ways out. The European model is not necessarily showing it being very wet in our area, but not dry either. The GFSO is not necessarily showing this at all. It's keeping the entire region relatively dry. CPC is showing it being relatively warm in that 8 to 14 day period. It's something I will think will come to fruition. In terms of precipitation, the last 7 days, we had some pockets of very heavy precipitation late last week around Falls City, north of Columbus, around Elgin, and to the north of Lexington, with very little amounts of precipitation in parts of Panhandle and just southeast of Lincoln. In terms of the drought monitor, we saw some more improvements across eastern Nebraska. Still just one little existing area drought, less than 2% of the state, but over toward Louisville, including parts of Lincoln, we are still technically in moderate drought. Soil moisture percentiles, again, mostly pretty good shape across the state. Some parts of the Panhandle where we have at normal dryness, we are below the 30th percentile for soil moisture, extremely wet up here in the upper Midwest. Relatively good range land conditions across the eastern portion of Sand Hills with little poor conditions across the Panhandle. Soil temperatures this week are mostly in the upper 60s to low 70s. And in terms of our temperature roundup, we saw temperatures range from 36 to 93 and 6.28 inches of rain in Platte Center. Thanks, and back to you, Bryce.
Alrighty, thank you, Eric. We sure appreciate that update. Finally, on this week's show, keeping you updated on some of the things that Nebraska Extension is up to. If you've ever wanted to fly a drone on your farm or ranch, you might actually need a license to do so. And Nebraska Extension is preparing to help you do just that through the Part 107 drone prep courses. These events will be happening June 7th through August 16th.
Nebraska Extension will be offering one-day courses across the state to prepare individuals to pass the Federal Aviation Administration's knowledge exam. This exam is required to receive a Part 107 remote pilot certification or license to fly drones for commercial applications.
One of the things that's kind of interesting is I get a lot of questions from farmers that are like, well, I'm going to fly a drone on my farm, so why do I need a license? I bought the drone myself, I'm flying it myself, and I'm flying it over my own crop. And the FAA actually considers drones aircraft, and they fall under aircraft rules. And the FAA considers farming commercial. And if you're flying a drone taking pictures of a crop, which will be sold, that's considered a commercial operation. So yes, so farmers, they need to have a license, whether they like it or not, to use a drone in their operations. So one of the requirements to get a drone license is to take an aeronautical knowledge exam. And so what this course does is prepare students to successfully pass that exam. And then, of course, once they pass the exam, then they can apply for their remote pilot license or drone license.
This course will cover aviation topics such as regulations, airspace, radio communication, weather, and other basic aviation concepts necessary to pass that Part 107 knowledge exam, which will consist of 60 multiple-choice questions.
This test is kind of hard. There's a lot of aviation material on it, and so if you have no aviation background, it's going to seem pretty foreign. And so the idea of this course, it's an 8-hour course, and basically I prepare the students to pass that test and focus on the material that might be the toughest for them. There's a lot of regulations, and there's a lot of splitting hairs on some of those regulations. One of them is the question of recreational versus commercial. People want to fly under recreational because, you know, it seems like there's less rules with it. But the FAA basically considers commercial to be the default, that everybody is commercial. And then you have to show that you're flying recreational, and that's a very specific set of guidelines. And so I just tell everybody, you know, get your drone license and you're good to go regardless of what it is you're doing.
While there are some online options available at a similar cost that allow you to study at your own schedule, there are definitely some aspects of an in-person education that outweigh the convenience of at-home study.
So I think in-person is better just because you have the interaction and you can get experiences from the students because they all have some kind of experience with drones. And I think it's easier to ask those questions, and it's a lot easier for me to answer them. So I think it's good for both the students and for me as the instructor.
While it is too late to sign up and attend the June 7th meeting in Scotts Bluff, there will be several other opportunities for you to join in on this educational opportunity. Your next opportunity will be next week. That's June 14th at the Syracuse Public Library in Syracuse, Nebraska. June 21st at the Hall County Extension Office in Grand Island. June 28th at the Gage County Extension Office in Beatrice. July 10th at the Stumpf International Wheat Center in Grant. August 8th at the Dodge County Extension Office in Fremont. And finally, August 16th at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln West Central Research, Extension, and Education Center in North Platte. Pre-registration is required with a $275 registration fee. That includes the day's lessons and all the study materials. The meetings will last about 8 hours. And with that in mind, a light breakfast and lunch will be offered at no additional cost. There will be an educational discount available to students and educators through an application process which will be available at the registration site. If you're interested in learning more about the events, you'll find more information as well as a registration link along with this story on the Market Journal website.
Well, that is going to do it for our broadcast as we join you from Custer County, just on the outskirts of Broken Bow. We sure appreciate you joining us today. If you did miss one of our stories, be sure you subscribe to the Market Journal YouTube channel. Also, like and follow us over on social media. That's where we post all of our content. We hope to see you back here next week. But until then, I'm Bryce Duskett, wishing you a safe and productive week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.